Hello, this is Daniel Hill, and this is my presentation for my final project in GUI. What I made was a bookshelf organizer app. It allows the user to input titles or authors or ISBNs of books into a list. They can manipulate the list by adding or removing more items, and then they can sort the list, and it'll sort it alphabetically or in uh, numeric order, depending on the mode that they have the program in, and it'll allow them to take that list and apply it to their bookshelf to sort their books. So to do this, I use two forms. The first is this instructions page. It allows the user to click through all the steps, they'll read about them, and then they'll hit continue. Now I had this as a required element to get to the other form. Uh, I mostly wanted to try it to see if it was actually useful, and added something to the program, which I think it does because not all the options are immediately apparent what they do or why you do them. So I added these instructions. Now, when you start the program, only step 1 and step 2 buttons are visible, step 3 and continue are invisible, so you have to click through at least step 2 and step 3 just once, and then the continue button will appear, and the continue button is what takes you to the second form. So here's a snippet of the instructions page code. Mostly it's just changing the background color of the buttons as you click them and the text of the label, but it also has the continue button click, which loads the second form and hides the first. So this is the app's main page. This is where a lot of the processing is done and the user interaction. I've got a list box, text input, radio buttons, a label that counts the total items in the list. I've got an add button, remove button, clear button, sort button, and save to file. Now, the text input is the first thing they start with, and it is input validated. First, you have to have a mode selected here, and then they have to follow the rules of that mode, being if you select alphabetic, you have to put in alphabetic input. If you select numeric, you can only input numbers. Um, I did this because arrays can't sort alphabetic and numeric things together. It just doesn't work like that. So that's how I limited them from running into that restriction. Now, as you can see, I've got the input validation, so if they try and click add before selecting a mode, they'll get this please select a mode error message. And if they select a mode but they have an input that doesn't match, for example, I used alphabetic mode with a input that says 1, 2, 3, then I clicked add. It says please include alphabetic input to the item, or to add the item. So as the user adds items and they can remove items, clear the list, um, then they can sort. Notably, they can't change modes in the middle of adding items. Once they've started, or once they've selected a mode, they cannot go back unless they clear the list. That's another, um, it's like a safety barrier keeping them from running into those issues. And once they've completed all they've done with the list, they can save it to a file. Now, that wasn't something I originally included in my case, but I wanted to include it because it seems practical and useful to this situation. It allows them to save the list, they can share the list, transfer the list to another device, anything like that. So I thought it was a useful feature. Here's a snippet of the main page code. The add button has a lot of input validation and then adds items to the list box after converting them to the right type. And it will also update the total items counter. The radio buttons change the enabled status to false for the one that isn't selected. Remove click, it'll remove an item selected in the list box and then update the total items. There's more to it, but I'll have to show you that in the program. In conclusion, the app uses many of the tools and the methods that we learned about over the duration of the course. It pushed me to do additional research and try new things. I ran into roadblocks along the way, and I had to do some research because a lot of the methods I was getting suggested online, they were in older versions of Visual Basic, so it took a lot of reading in both my textbook and on forums online to figure out some of the features, and also I was just overcomplicating some things. So working through it, I'm just glad I got it to work, and I think it is a practical, simple program. Um, and yeah, let me show you the actual program itself then. I guess I'll start by running it. So as you can see, step 1 is highlighted, step 2 is visible, and the label is saying step 1's instructions. I can click step 2, the label changes. Step 2 is highlighted, step 1 becomes unhighlighted, and step 3 is visible. I can click step 3 and continue shows up, the label changes. Now I can go back and select any of these again, and it'll change the label and the highlight, but I will click continue to reach the main page of the form. Let me start by just clicking add to show you the input validation. Got an input error. Okay. So let me try, I'll select alphabetic, but I'll type 1, 2, 3. Please include alphabetic input to add the item. Fine, I will put in something. Let's say I wrote a book. This is the author's name. So it adds it to the list. Henry, Brad, sure. So I'm adding a list of authors. Matthew Freeman. Okay, so I've got a couple items here. I can remove items, and it will remove them from the list. Let me add Andrew McGaff. So as you can see, I can now clear the list, and it will clear the list box, remove this label, and it will make both of these buttons enabled so I can change my mode again. Let me go numeric. I'll put in an ISBN. I'm not typing all those numbers, so I'll just put in a couple. So here I have some items. I can now click sort, and it will sort them numerically. Let me clear that and show you that with alphabetic input. Now I can click sort. Got a sorted list. Now when I'm done with all that, well first as you can see the total items has been incrementally updating as I add items and keeping track of the total amount. If I remove it, changes the count then as well. And now I can save it to a file. Now when I do that, it saves to a text file. Let me go and grab it. There we have it. So as you can see, it's an updated list. And that's everything to it. Let me show you some of the code and talk about some of the parts that gave me trouble. Form 1 wasn't a ton of trouble. I never changed the background color of items in the code part, so I had to figure out the syntax for that. It wasn't too hard though. And then changing the text. So all of these are just changing the background color as you click through the buttons, and making button 3 visible and the continue button visible, and changing the text of the label, and then continue it hides the first form and instantiates a new second form and shows it. But form 2 is where I ran into some issues, mostly my own fault. I was overcomplicating things. I tried adding items to an array before adding them to the list box. I thought that would be the easier way. So I started with some class variables up here, and they were the arrays. And I wanted to have them add items to both the array and the list box, or have the list box read from the arrays. But really, that was just more complicated than it needed to be. And I was running into some errors with the input validation and then sorting it again. So instead, I just added it to the list box and then read it to the array, which is something we haven't done before. We've done array to list box and text file to array to list box, but we've never gone list box to array. So, um, but I'll show you that in a minute. So basically, we've got some input validations, check for a selected mode. If it's in alphabetic mode, it checks to make sure that the input is alphabetic, and then it adds the item to the list box. If it's in numeric mode, it checks to see if the input is numeric and adds it to the list box. And then the label that shows the total amount of items becomes visible, and it updates the count, and then it clears the input box. Next, we have the alphabetic checked and numeric checked. Basically, these just disable the other option so that you can't change modes during the addition to the list. The button remove, it takes the list item at the selected index and removes it from the list, and it updates the total. And clear, it basically resets everything, resets the count, and also makes both of the radio buttons enabled. Finally, or not finally, here's the sort button. This is the part that gave me the most trouble. It looks simple now, but I had it really complicated because I was trying to do it backwards from what I needed to do it. But basically, what I did, I've got two if statements. I've got one for alphabetic, one for numeric. Interestingly enough, the list box have a property called like is sorted. So you can make this true, and it will sort um, alphabetic inputs and items in the list, but that doesn't work for numeric items. So you have to do that manually. So I ended up just doing it manually for both, since I didn't want it to not make sense why there's a sorted button if you didn't use the numeric mode. So for alphabetic, I I got it to add the list items to a string of item or an array of string items, and it converts each list item to a string. I had never used this syntax right here, the list items dot items at I. I didn't know you could do that to select an item by its index, so that took me some research. There was another method people were doing where it was like add range on the array. It was like, no, it must have been on the list box. I don't remember. It must have been the array. But I experimented with that and I found that it was giving me more errors than was worth. I thought it'd be cool to implement because it was something we hadn't used yet, but I didn't get it to work. But after adding all the items in the list box to the array, it sorts them and then clears the list box, and then it populates the list box with a newly sorted list. And then it does the same thing for numeric. I had to separate them because one of them uses an array that's made of decimal items, the other uses an array that's made of strings. So once it is done, it just adds the items back after clearing the unsorted list. And finally, here is the save button. So I initialize a new object writer, Here's the path to my text file. Um, and basically iterates through the list and writes it to the text file. Nothing new, we've done this several times, but I thought it was relevant to add, and I thought it was a nice touch to add to the practicality of the program. Um, so that's really everything. Uh, Thank you so much. I learned a lot in this course. It was actually kind of fun. Uh, I appreciate it. Bye.